Intro music fades in. Innocent black girl defends herself against false accusation by cop. Courtroom shocked. She was just 12 years old, accused of a crime so serious it could ruin her future forever. A necklace worth thousands, a police officer's word, and a courtroom filled with strangers, everything seemed stacked against her. But wait, what if the truth was buried under lies? Stay tuned to Dark Stories to uncover the shocking twists in this case. As the trial unfolded, cracks began to appear in the story. Evidence didn't add up, and the truth, buried under assumptions and lies, started to surface. What really happened that day? How could a young girl fight back against a system that had already decided her guilt? And what shocking twist left everyone in the courtroom stunned? This is a story you don't want to miss on Dark Stories. The courtroom buzzed with hushed conversations, the air thick with tension and curiosity. This was not an ordinary trial, and everyone present knew it. The case had made headlines: 12-year-old black girl accused of jewelry store theft. The headline alone had sparked outrage in some corners of the city and skepticism in others. Yet, here they all were, gathered in the imposing chamber of the New York Supreme Court, waiting to see how justice would unfold. At the center of it all sat Tiana Bennett, a petite girl with her hair braided neatly, wearing a faded school uniform that hung slightly loose on her frame. She sat so still, it was as if she were trying to disappear into the polished wooden chair. Her brown eyes darted around the room, taking in the rows of strangers staring at her, some with sympathy, others with doubt. Her small hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, though she tried to keep her composure. Beside her was Miranda Cole, her attorney, a woman known for her fiery courtroom demeanor and relentless pursuit of justice. Miranda had taken Tiana's case without hesitation, disgusted by the accusations and what she believed was a blatant miscarriage of justice. She adjusted her glasses and leaned close to Tiana, whispering, "Remember what we talked about, sweetheart? Stay calm. The truth is on our side." Tiana nodded slightly but didn't say a word. She glanced at her parents sitting just behind her. Her mother, Patricia Bennett, had her hands clasped in prayer, her lips moving silently as tears glistened in her eyes. Her father, Jerome Bennett, sat stoic, his jaw clenched, as if holding back every emotion threatening to break free. At the prosecutor's table sat Assistant District Attorney James Grayson, a tall man with slicked back hair and an air of self-assuredness. Next to him was Officer Daniel McAllister, the man who had accused Tiana. He wore his uniform with pride, his chest puffed out, as if his mere presence demanded respect. His eyes darted to Tiana occasionally, but there was no remorse in his expression, only resolve. To him, this was an open and shut case. "All rise," the bailiff's voice echoed through the room, signaling the arrival of Judge Margaret Hensley, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s known for her no-nonsense demeanor. The room fell silent as she took her seat at the bench, her gavel tapping lightly against the wood. "This court is now in session," Judge Hensley announced, her voice firm but calm. "We are here today for the case of the People versus Tiana Bennett. Prosecution, you may proceed with your opening statement." ADA Grayson stood, buttoning his suit jacket as he walked to the center of the room. His voice was smooth, practiced, and dripping with confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, gesturing to the panel seated off to the side, "today, we are here because a crime was committed. A valuable necklace was stolen from the exclusive Carter & Company jewelry store in Manhattan. And while it pains me to say this, the evidence will show that the person responsible is none other than the defendant, Miss Tiana Bennett." Grayson paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. He turned slightly, glancing at Tiana with an almost pitying expression before continuing. "We understand that this case is sensitive due to the defendant's young age, but theft is theft, and no one is above the law. Officer McAllister, a decorated member of the NYPD, will testify that he apprehended Miss Bennett at the scene with the stolen necklace in her possession. The store's security footage will corroborate his account. The evidence is clear, the facts are indisputable, and at the end of this trial, I am confident you will reach the only logical conclusion: guilt." Grayson returned to his seat, nodding slightly to McAllister, who gave him a curt, confident nod in return. Miranda stood next, her movements deliberate as she made her way to the jury. She took a moment to survey the room, letting her presence settle over the courtroom like a quiet storm about to break. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, her tone measured and calm. What you just heard was a carefully crafted story. A story designed to make you believe that a 12-year-old girl, a child, planned and executed a theft from one of the most secure jewelry stores in Manhattan. A story based not on facts, but on assumptions. Here's the question that will haunt you: what if the system got it wrong? Keep watching Dark Stories to find out how Tiana's fight for justice unfolds. Miranda turned to the jury, locking eyes with them one by one. I will show you that Tiana Bennett is innocent. I will show you how the evidence has been misinterpreted, how bias has clouded judgment, and how the truth has been overshadowed by haste to convict a young black girl. At the end of this trial, I trust you will see through the cracks in this so-called open-and-shut case and deliver the justice that Tiana deserves. She returned to her seat, placing a reassuring hand on Tiana's shoulder. We've got this, she whispered. The prosecution called their first witness, Officer McAllister. He strode to the stand confidently, his uniform crisp, his badge gleaming under the courtroom lights as he raised his right hand to take the oath. Tiana's heart pounded in her chest. This was the man who had accused her, who had turned her world upside down with his words. Miranda watched him closely, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She knew this case was far from over, and she was ready for the fight ahead. The courtroom felt colder now, as if the collective tension of everyone present had drawn the warmth out of the air. Tiana's small hands fidgeted under the table, her fingers twisting together in an endless loop. Every sound seemed amplified: the shuffle of papers, the creak of chairs, the soft murmurs from the gallery. All eyes were now on Officer Daniel McAllister as he sat on the witness stand, straight-backed and radiating confidence. Miranda watched him like a hawk, her pen resting idly against her notebook. She wasn't jotting anything down, she had already memorized his report and the details of his testimony. No, she was observing him, noting every subtle gesture, every shift in tone. This was a man who believed himself untouchable, and that belief might just be his undoing. The prosecution began its questioning, with ADA Grayson pacing leisurely before the jury. Officer McAllister, Grayson began, his voice smooth and steady, can you please tell the court what happened on the day of the alleged theft? McAllister adjusted his posture slightly, clasping his hands together on the stand. His voice was deep and deliberate, carrying an air of authority that he clearly relished. Of course, he said. It was around 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday. I was patrolling the area near Fifth Avenue when I received a call about a potential shoplifting incident at Carter & Company, a high-end jewelry store. When I arrived, the store owner, Mrs. Eleanor Carter, directed me to the suspect, this young girl. He gestured vaguely toward Tiana, his eyes grazing her as if she were an inanimate object. She was standing near the exit, looking nervous. I approached her and asked if she'd been in the store earlier, and she immediately became defensive. Miranda narrowed her eyes but remained silent, letting the officer continue uninterrupted. I asked to check her backpack, McAllister continued, and inside, I found the necklace in question, a diamond and sapphire piece valued at over $10,000. At that point, I informed her that she was being detained for suspicion of theft. He paused, glancing toward the jury as if expecting their approval. She claimed she didn't know how the necklace got there, but the evidence speaks for itself. The necklace was in her possession. I followed proper procedure, took her into custody, and filed my report. Grayson nodded, as though the testimony had already sealed the case. Thank you, Officer McAllister. To clarify, did you have any doubts at the time that Miss Bennett had stolen the necklace? None, McAllister replied firmly. Her behavior was suspicious, and the evidence was clear. Grayson smiled, stepping back toward his table. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Hensley turned her gaze toward Miranda. Miss Cole, your witness. Miranda rose slowly, her heels clicking softly against the polished wood floor as she approached the witness stand. She stood there for a moment, just looking at McAllister, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched long enough to make him shift slightly in his seat. Officer McAllister, Miranda began, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. You testified that you followed proper procedure when you detained Tiana Bennett, is that correct? That's correct, McAllister replied, his tone steady. And part of proper procedure involves turning on your body camera during any interaction with a suspect, does it not?
McAllister hesitated for the briefest moment before answering.
Yes, it does. Then can you explain to the court why your body camera footage from that day conveniently cuts out right before you approach Tiana?
The courtroom buzzed with whispers.
McAllister's jaw tightened.
It was a technical malfunction, he said, his voice more defensive now.
The equipment isn't perfect. Miranda arched an eyebrow. A technical malfunction. Interesting. And yet, in the 6 months prior to this incident, your body camera recorded every interaction without issue, isn't that correct?
Correct, McAllister replied, his tone clipped.
Grayson shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. Miranda turned toward the judge.
Your Honor, this goes to the credibility of the witness and the reliability of his testimony.
Judge Hensley nodded. I'll allow it. Proceed. Miranda turned back to McAllister, her gaze unflinching.
Officer McAllister, let me rephrase.
Isn't it true that your body camera has never had a technical malfunction prior to this incident?
McAllister hesitated again, his fingers gripping the edge of the witness stand.
To my knowledge, no. And isn't it also true, Miranda continued, her voice sharpening, that the only record we have of Tiana's alleged suspicious behavior comes from your word?
The body camera, which could have provided an unbiased account, conveniently stopped recording, isn't that correct? McAllister's face reddened slightly.
The evidence was in her backpack, he snapped. That's all the proof anyone should need.
Miranda took a step closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing the courtroom to lean in.
Officer McAllister, are you absolutely certain that the necklace was in Tiana's backpack when you searched it?
Yes, he said, but his voice lacked the same conviction it had earlier.
Let me remind you, officer, Miranda said, her tone icy now, you are under oath, and tampering with evidence or lying about it is a crime.
The room was silent, save for the soft scratch of Miranda's pen as she jotted down a note. She stepped back, her eyes still locked on McAllister. No further questions, Your Honor, she said, her voice calm and measured. But as she returned to her seat, the tension in the room had shifted. The jury exchanged glances, and for the first time, cracks began to show in the prosecution's case.
The courtroom, though crowded, felt eerily quiet.
The faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence as Officer McAllister stepped down from the witness stand, his shoulders stiff. His confidence, which had been unshakable mere moments ago, now seemed fractured. Miranda watched him closely as he returned to his seat beside the prosecutor, her sharp eyes catching the subtle clenching of his jaw. Tiana shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her small frame tense, as if she were trying to absorb the weight of the room. Miranda leaned toward her, whispering gently, "You're doing great, Tiana.
Just keep breathing. This is far from over."
Judge Hensley's gavel tapped lightly against the wooden block, drawing attention back to the bench. The defense may call its next witness, she announced, her voice calm but firm.
Miranda stood and straightened her blazer, her movements deliberate.
Every step she took toward the center of the room was measured, commanding attention without a single word. She turned to the jury, her expression serious but composed. "Your Honor," she began, addressing Judge Hensley before turning back to the jury, "the defense calls Eleanor Carter, owner of Carter & Company Jewelry Store, to the stand." There was a faint murmur in the gallery as Eleanor Carter, a tall, impeccably dressed woman in her late 50s, made her way to the witness stand. Her tailored suit and pearl necklace spoke of wealth and sophistication, and her carefully styled silver hair gave her an air of authority. She adjusted her glasses as she took her seat, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Carter," Miranda began, her tone polite but probing, "thank you for joining us today.
Can you please confirm your role at Carter & Company Jewelry Store?" Eleanor nodded, her voice steady but clipped. "I am the owner and manager of the store.
I've run the business for over 30 years.
And you were present on the day of the alleged theft?" Miranda asked.
"Yes, I was," Eleanor replied, her tone firm.
"Can you walk us through what you witnessed that day?"
Eleanor hesitated for a moment, glancing at McAllister before answering. "I saw the girl, Tiana, enter the store. She was looking at some of the pieces in the front display. She didn't touch anything, but she seemed hesitant.
Miranda's eyebrows lifted lightly. Hesitant in what way?
Well, Eleanor said, shifting in her seat. She was fidgeting, looking around nervously.
It seemed suspicious at the time. Miranda nodded, her tone remaining neutral. And what happened next?
I stepped into the back office to take a phone call, Eleanor explained. When I returned, Officer McAllister was already in the store, speaking with Tiana. He told me he'd found the necklace in her backpack. Miranda paused, letting the words hang in the air, then stepped closer to the witness stand, her voice soft but pointed.
Mrs. Carter, did you personally see Tiana take the necklace? Eleanor blinked, her composure faltering for a split second.
No, she admitted.
I didn't see her take anything.
And yet you called the police.
Why? Eleanor straightened her back, her voice defensive now.
Because Officer McAllister insisted she was guilty. He said he had clear evidence, and I trusted his judgment.
Miranda nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful.
So, just to clarify for the jury, your decision to involve the police was based entirely on Officer McAllister's word, is that correct?
Yes, Eleanor replied reluctantly. Miranda turned slightly, addressing the jury directly now. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just heard that the sole eyewitness in this case didn't actually witness the alleged theft.
Instead, the accusation rests entirely on the word of one man, Officer McAllister, whose testimony has already been called into question. The gallery stirred, the weight of Miranda's words sinking in.
Miranda turned back to Eleanor, her voice sharp now. Mrs. Carter, are you aware that security footage from a nearby store shows another child running out of Carter and Company at the time of the incident?
Eleanor's eyes widened, her carefully composed facade cracking. No, she said, her voice barely above a whisper.
Miranda held up a printed still frame from the footage, walking toward the jury to show them.
The image was grainy but clear enough to depict a child, older and slightly taller than Tiana, sprinting out of the jewelry store's entrance.
The child's hoodie obscured their face, but the resemblance to Tiana's uniform was unmistakable.
This is the individual captured on camera fleeing the scene, Miranda said, her voice rising slightly for emphasis.
Not Tiana Bennett.
Eleanor looked stunned, her hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. I didn't know, she stammered. No further questions, Your Honor, Miranda said, her tone firm. She returned to her seat, casting a quick glance at Tiana, who was staring down at her lap, her small hands trembling.
Miranda gently placed a hand on Tiana's shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Judge Hensley addressed the court. The jury will take a short recess while the next piece of evidence is prepared. As the jury filed out of the room, the tension in the courtroom remained palpable.
McAllister avoided eye contact with anyone, his face pale. The gallery buzzed with whispered conversations, speculation, and doubt rippling through the room like a tide.
Tiana's mother leaned forward, her voice trembling as she whispered to Miranda, "Do you think it's enough?"
Miranda turned, her expression calm but resolute.
It's a start.
The truth always has a way of coming out, and when it does, they'll wish they'd never doubted her.
Tiana glanced up at Miranda, her brown eyes glistening with unshed tears.
For the first time since the trial began, there was a flicker of hope. The courtroom reconvened after the brief recess, and as the jury returned to their seats, the atmosphere felt different, heavier, almost. The weight of doubt had begun to seep into the prosecution's case, and every face in the room bore the subtle marks of unease. The gallery whispered in hushed tones, though a stern glare from Judge Hensley quickly silenced the crowd.
"All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Hensley took her place at the bench once again.
She surveyed the room, her sharp gaze settling briefly on both tables before tapping her gavel.
"This court is back in session," she declared. "Defense, you may proceed."
Miranda Cole rose slowly, her every movement deliberate as she approached the center of the room. Her calm demeanor exuded confidence, though her mind was sharp and alert, calculating every step of her strategy. She turned toward the jury, her voice clear and steady.
"Ladies and gentlemen, we've seen evidence today that calls into question the foundation of the prosecution's case.
But there's more to this story, much more. The defense calls Raymond Harris, an expert in forensic video analysis, to the stand. A tall, bespectacled man in his 40s made his way to the witness stand, carrying a laptop and a folder filled with documents. He moved with quiet confidence, setting his materials down carefully before raising his right hand to take the oath.
Once seated, Miranda began. "Mr. Harris, can you please state your credentials for the court?"
Harris adjusted his glasses, his voice professional yet approachable. "I've been a forensic video analyst for over 15 years, specializing in enhancing and authenticating video footage for legal cases. I've worked on cases at both the state and federal levels, including high-profile investigations."
Miranda nodded. "And were you provided with the original footage from the nearby security camera, the one showing an individual fleeing the jewelry store?"
"Yes, I was," Harris confirmed.
"Can you describe your findings?"
Harris opened his laptop and connected it to the courtroom's display system. The monitor lit up, showing the grainy security footage from earlier, but this time it had been enhanced. The figure running from the store was now slightly clearer, the hoodie and baggy jeans were still present, but subtle details began to emerge. "As you can see," Harris explained, using a laser pointer to highlight specific features, "the individual in the footage is not Tiana Bennett. Based on their height and build, they are approximately 4 inches taller and appear to be older, likely a teenager or young adult." The courtroom murmured in surprise, prompting Judge Hensley to tap her gavel for order.
Harris continued.
"Furthermore, I analyzed the timestamp and cross-referenced it with the store's internal footage provided by the prosecution.
There's a clear discrepancy between the two.
This individual exits the store before Officer McAllister even arrives, meaning the necklace was already taken from the premises when Tiana was approached." Miranda allowed the weight of Harris's statement to settle over the room before speaking again.
"Thank you, Mr. Harris. One more question, in your professional opinion, is there any evidence linking Tiana Bennett to the theft?"
Harris shook his head firmly.
"None whatsoever. The evidence suggests she was mistakenly identified and wrongfully accused."
"Thank you," Miranda said, turning to Judge Hensley.
"No further questions."
Grayson stood, his expression tight as he approached the stand, his tone clipped, his frustration barely concealed.
"Mr. Harris, is it possible that this footage has been altered or tampered with in any way?"
"No, it's not," Harris replied calmly.
"I verified its authenticity before conducting my analysis. The metadata confirms it has not been edited."
Grayson frowned but didn't press further. He returned to his seat, clearly unsettled, as Harris stepped down from the stand.
Miranda called her final witness, Officer Julia Morales, a former colleague of McAllister.
The gallery stirred at this unexpected move, and even McAllister seemed caught off guard, his expression darkening as Morales entered the courtroom. Officer Morales, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, took the stand. Her NYPD badge gleamed against her uniform, though her posture suggested she was wary of what lay ahead.
"Officer Morales," Miranda began, "how long have you worked with the NYPD?"
15 years, Morales replied. "I served alongside Officer McAllister for 3 of those years."
"And in your time working with him, did you ever witness any behavior that gave you pause?"
Morales hesitated, glancing toward McAllister, whose glare could have cut steel. She swallowed hard but finally spoke.
"Yes."
The courtroom erupted into murmurs again, and Judge Hensley's gavel came down sharply.
"Order." Miranda pressed forward. "Can you elaborate, Officer Morales?" Morales took a deep breath.
McAllister has a history of cutting corners. He's been known to make assumptions about suspects without thoroughly investigating. There were a few incidents where his actions were called into question, but they were dismissed as minor infractions. "Minor infractions," Miranda repeated, her voice laced with incredulity.
"Can you give the court an example?" Morales nodded reluctantly.
"There was a case 2 years ago where he accused a young man of trespassing. It turned out the man lived in the building and was locked out of his apartment.
McAllister never verified his ID before detaining him." Miranda turned to the jury.
"Ladies and gentlemen, we now have testimony from a fellow officer that Officer McAllister has a pattern of jumping to conclusions without proper investigation. Combined with the lack of evidence tying Tiana Bennett to this crime, it becomes clear that this case is built on shaky ground.
As Morales stepped down, Miranda addressed the court one final time.
"Your Honor," she said, her voice firm but composed, "we've presented evidence that not only exonerates Tiana Bennett but also calls into question the integrity of the investigation itself. Officer McAllister's credibility is in doubt, the security footage does not implicate Tiana, and no physical evidence ties her to this theft. I urge the jury to consider the facts and deliver the only verdict that justice demands, not guilty." The jury sat in silence, their expressions a mix of shock and contemplation. McAllister, now visibly agitated, leaned toward Grayson, whispering furiously, "But the damage was done." The cracks in the prosecution's case had widened into an undeniable chasm, and the weight of their mistakes was finally coming to bear. The courtroom was still, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest like a heavy weight. Even the whispers and murmurs that had rippled through the earlier proceedings were gone. Everyone in the room, from the jury to the spectators in the gallery, seemed to be holding their breath. The tension was almost unbearable, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks the oppressive quiet. Tiana sat motionless, her small hands clenched in her lap. Her mother, Patricia, leaned forward on the bench behind her, silently mouthing a prayer, while Jerome, her father, kept his eyes fixed on the jury box, his jaw tight. Miranda Cole remained calm, her hands resting lightly on the table, though her mind was racing.
She knew they had done enough to create doubt, but was it enough to counter the biases that hung in the air like an unspoken truth?
Judge Hensley, seated at the bench, cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard the arguments, reviewed the evidence, and listened to the testimonies. The fate of this case now rests in your hands.
You are dismissed to deliberate."
The jury began to rise, but one juror, an older white man seated on the far left, lingered for a moment, his gaze resting on Tiana. His expression softened slightly, but he said nothing as he followed the others out of the room. The Bennetts, Miranda, and the rest of the courtroom waited in a kind of suspended animation.
Time dragged, as though the clock itself had slowed, each tick echoing louder than the last.
Tiana sat stiffly, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her, as if afraid to look anywhere else. Patricia reached forward, placing her hand gently on her daughter's shoulder. "You've been so brave," Patricia whispered, her voice trembling.
"No matter what happens, you're my hero, Tiana."
Tiana didn't respond, but she reached up to hold her mother's hand, clinging to it like a lifeline. Miranda glanced over at the Bennetts, her usual confidence now tempered with the weight of uncertainty. She had done everything she could, exposed McAllister's lies, dismantled the prosecution's evidence, and presented the truth, but she knew that even the truth wasn't always enough in a system that often leaned toward presumption over fairness. Across the room, Officer McAllister sat rigidly, his face unreadable but his clenched fists betraying his frustration. ADA Grayson leaned toward him, whispering in hushed tones, likely advising him to stay composed, but the officer's jaw tightened with each passing second. After what felt like an eternity but in reality was only 2 hours, the jury filed back into the room, their faces unreadable, a mix of stoic concentration and quiet resolve. The gallery leaned forward as one, the collective weight of anticipation nearly audible. "All rise," the bailiff called, prompting everyone to stand as Judge Hensley re-entered the courtroom. She sat down and gestured for everyone else to follow suit. Once the room settled, she turned to the jury foreperson, a middle-aged woman in a navy blazer, who held the slip of paper containing their decision. "Have you reached a verdict?" Judge Hensley asked. The foreperson stood, her face composed but serious.
"We have, Your Honor."
She handed the slip of paper to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. The room was so quiet that the sound of the paper being unfolded seemed almost deafening. Judge Hensley's eyes scanned the verdict, her expression giving away nothing. "Will the defendant please rise?" the judge announced. Tiana stood shakily, Miranda's steady hand on her shoulder for support. Patricia clutched Jerome's hand behind her, her lips moving silently in prayer.
Judge Hensley returned the slip of paper to the foreperson.
"Please read the verdict." The foreperson cleared her throat, her voice steady but soft.
"In the case of the People versus Tiana Bennett, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty."
For a moment, it was as though the words didn't register. The room remained frozen, the silence so thick it felt as though it would never break.
And then, all at once, the tension snapped.
Patricia let out a choked sob, covering her face as tears streamed down her cheeks.
Jerome's stoicism crumbled as he pulled his wife into a tight embrace.
Tiana stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief, before she turned to Miranda, who knelt to her level. "You did it, Tiana," Miranda said softly, her own voice thick with emotion.
"You told the truth, and justice won today." Tiana nodded slowly, her lips trembling as tears finally spilled over.
She threw her arms around Miranda, clinging to her like a lifeline. But the moment of relief was interrupted as Judge Hensley spoke again, her tone now sharper, directed at the prosecution table. "Before this court adjourns, I want to address Officer McAllister." McAllister, who had been sitting stiffly, flinched at the sound of his name. He looked up, his face pale but his jaw still set in defiance. "Officer McAllister," the judge said, her voice icy, "this court has serious concerns about your conduct during this case. The inconsistencies in your testimony, the unexplained tampering with your body camera, and your failure to properly investigate the incident have not gone unnoticed." She leaned forward slightly, her piercing gaze locked on him. "You've undermined the integrity of the justice system and nearly ruined the life of an innocent child.
Your actions will not go unexamined. I am recommending a full review of your conduct to the Internal Affairs Bureau."
The gallery erupted in murmurs again, this time louder and tinged with outrage. McAllister's face turned an alarming shade of red as he slumped back in his chair, his once imposing confidence now reduced to ashes. "And to the Bennetts," Judge Hensley said, her tone softening as she turned to Tiana and her family, "I deeply regret that you were put through this ordeal. This court failed you, and I hope today marks the beginning of healing for your family." Patricia nodded through her tears, her voice too choked to respond. Jerome simply tightened his hold on his wife and daughter, as though afraid to let them go. The scene outside the courthouse was chaotic, as reporters swarmed the Bennetts. But Miranda shielded Tiana from the flashing cameras and intrusive questions. They moved quickly to their waiting car, the door slamming shut to block out the noise. Inside the quiet of the car, Tiana finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper.
"Mom, Dad, am I really free now?" Jerome turned to his daughter, his expression softening as he placed a hand on her cheek. "You've always been free, baby. You just had to remind the world of that." Tiana smiled faintly, the weight of the last few weeks still heavy but beginning to lift. And as the car pulled away from the courthouse, she stared out the window, watching the city blur past. For the first time in weeks, she felt something she hadn't dared to hope for: peace. The Bennett family sat together in the quiet sanctuary of their small living room, the dim glow of a single lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. The echoes of the courtroom still lingered in their minds, but for the first time in weeks, there was no tension, only the kind of exhaustion that comes from surviving a storm. Tiana sat curled up on the couch, her knees tucked under her chin as she clutched a warm cup of tea her mother had made for her. The steam swirled lazily upward, and for a moment, she simply stared into it, letting its warmth seep into her hands. Patricia sat beside her, gently running her fingers through her daughter's hair, a soothing motion she hadn't done in years but now felt like a lifeline for both of them. "You okay, baby?" Patricia asked softly, breaking the silence. Tiana nodded but didn't look up. "I think so," she whispered, her voice small, as though she wasn't sure she believed it yet. Jerome, sitting across from them in his worn armchair, leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "You don't have to be okay yet," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "What happened to you, to all of us, it's going to take time to process. And that's okay." A knock at the door broke the quiet, and Patricia rose to answer it. When she opened it, Miranda Cole stood there, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers and wearing the faintest trace of a smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Miranda said, her voice warm but slightly hesitant. "Of course not," Patricia replied, stepping aside to let her in. "Please, come in. You've done so much for us. You're always welcome here." Miranda entered, handing Patricia the flowers before turning her attention to Tiana. She crouched down beside the couch, her eyes level with the young girl's. "How are you holding up, champ?" Miranda asked softly. Tiana shrugged, her fingers tightening slightly around the mug. It still feels weird, she admitted. Like it didn't really happen, but it also did. Miranda nodded, her expression understanding. That's normal. What you went through wasn't fair, and it's going to take time to feel like yourself again. But you're stronger than you think, Tiana. You proved that to everyone. Tiana looked at her for a long moment, her eyes searching Miranda's face. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you for believing me when nobody else did." Miranda's smile widened, and she reached out to gently squeeze Tiana's shoulder. You didn't need me to believe in you. You already knew the truth. I just helped make sure everyone else saw it too. The adults moved to the kitchen table, giving Tiana a little space to herself. Jerome poured Miranda a cup of tea, and they sat in a quiet circle, the weight of the recent weeks still present but less suffocating. I don't know how we'll ever repay you, Patricia said, her voice filled with gratitude. You saved our family. Miranda shook her head, setting her mug down. You don't need to repay me. What happened to Tiana, what happens to so many kids like her, should never have happened in the first place. That's why I took this case, because no one should ever have to fight this hard just to prove their innocence. Jerome's brow furrowed, his voice tinged with anger. But why did it happen? Why does someone like McAllister get to ruin lives and walk away like nothing happened? Miranda's expression grew serious, her hands clasping together. He won't walk away, she said firmly. The judge's referral to internal affairs is just the beginning. And cases like this, they don't go unnoticed anymore. The public is watching. Patricia nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her mug. But it doesn't feel like enough, she admitted. He could have destroyed Tiana's life, our lives. And for what? Because of how she looks? Miranda didn't answer immediately. She looked toward the living room, where Tiana sat quietly on the couch, the glow of the lamp highlighting her young, thoughtful face. You're right, Miranda said finally. It's not enough. But it's a start. And sometimes, change starts with one voice, one case, one person who refuses to stay silent. Tiana's bravery today, it's bigger than this case. It's the kind of story that can inspire others to stand up, to demand better. Later that evening, as Miranda prepared to leave, Tiana surprised everyone by walking up to her near the door. She was still small, still quiet, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Miss Cole, she said softly. Miranda turned, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. Yes, Tiana? When I grow up, I want to be like you, Tiana said, her voice trembling slightly but full of determination. I want to help people. I don't want anyone to feel like I did. Miranda's throat tightened, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. Finally, she smiled, her voice warm and full of pride. You already are, Tiana. Don't ever forget that. Tiana nodded, and for the first time in days, her smile reached her eyes. As Miranda drove away that night, the city lights flickering through her car window, she thought about everything the Bennetts had endured. The road to justice had been long, and there were still battles to be fought, but tonight felt like a small victory, not just for Tiana, but for something bigger. In the Bennett household, as the family began to settle in for the night, a quiet peace began to take root. They didn't know what the future held, but for now, they were together, and together, they were stronger than anything the world could throw at them. In her bedroom, Tiana sat at her desk, a notebook open in front of her. She picked up a pencil and began to write, her small, neat handwriting filling the page. Dear Miss Cole, she began, I promise I'll make you proud. The spark of hope had grown into a flame, and though the storm had passed, its lessons would stay with them forever. The days following the trial passed quietly in the Bennett household, yet the world outside their doors seemed anything but. Tiana's case had sparked conversations far beyond the courtroom. It was on local news stations, in newspapers, and even discussed on social media. Though Patricia and Jerome shielded Tiana from most of it, they wanted her to focus on being a child again, to reclaim the part of her life that the ordeal had momentarily stolen. Tiana spent her first days of freedom cautiously. She didn't run to the park with her friends or hop on her bike to explore the neighborhood. Instead, she stayed close to home, her movements hesitant, as if she were still trying to convince herself it was safe to simply exist.
Her parents tried their best to fill the house with warmth, laughter, and the kind of normalcy they feared might never feel the same again.
Jerome fixed up the squeaky porch swing, and Patricia baked Tiana's favorite cookies, oatmeal raisin, warm and gooey, but Tiana only nibbled on them, her appetite dulled by lingering anxiety. One crisp autumn morning, a knock came at the front door.
Patricia answered it, surprised to see Eleanor Carter, the jewelry store owner, standing on the porch. The older woman was dressed as impeccably as always, but her face bore an expression that was far removed from the haughty confidence she'd exuded in court. She looked tired, almost humbled, as she clutched a neatly wrapped box in her hands.
"Mrs. Bennett," Eleanor began, her voice quieter than Patricia remembered, "I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, but may I come in?"
Patricia hesitated, her maternal instincts warring with her desire to be gracious. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone cautious.
"I'd like to speak with Tiana," Eleanor said, "and with you, if that's all right. I owe your family an apology."
Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly, but after a moment, she opened the door wider and gestured for Eleanor to come inside. Eleanor stepped into the modest living room, her polished appearance starkly contrasting with the warmth and simplicity of the Bennett home.
Tiana peeked out from the kitchen, her eyes widening when she saw Eleanor.
She instinctively moved closer to her mother, gripping Patricia's arm tightly.
"It's okay, sweetheart," Patricia said softly, crouching to meet Tiana's nervous gaze. "She just wants to talk." Eleanor approached slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. She knelt slightly so she wasn't towering over Tiana and extended the box toward her. "This is for you," Eleanor said. "It's not enough, not by a long shot, but I wanted to give you something to show how deeply sorry I am." Tiana hesitated, her wide eyes flicking toward her mother for reassurance. Patricia nodded gently, and Tiana tentatively took the box, her small hands trembling slightly. She opened it to reveal a delicate silver necklace with a tiny sunflower pendant. It was beautiful, but Tiana's expression remained unreadable. "I didn't believe you," Eleanor admitted, her voice thick with regret, "and that was wrong. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and because of that, you and your family suffered. I've spent the last few days thinking about what I could have done differently, and the truth is, I should have trusted you from the start." Tiana looked down at the necklace, her finger brushing over the smooth silver surface. "Why didn't you?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible. Eleanor's breath caught, and she seemed to struggle for words. I don't have a good answer," she said finally. "Maybe I was scared of losing my business, or maybe I just didn't want to see the truth about myself. Either way, I was wrong, and I'll carry that guilt with me for the rest of my life." Patricia watched the exchange with a mixture of emotions. Part of her wanted to ask Eleanor to leave, to tell her that no apology could undo the harm she'd caused. But another part of her, the part that wanted to teach Tiana about grace and resilience, stayed silent, allowing the moment to unfold. Tiana looked up at Eleanor, her young face filled with a quiet wisdom far beyond her years. "It still hurts," she said honestly, "but I forgive you." Eleanor blinked rapidly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're a remarkable young lady, Tiana. I hope you know that." After Eleanor left, Tiana sat on the couch, turning the necklace over in her hands. "Do you think people can really change, Mom?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. Patricia sat down beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I think people can change if they really want to," she said. "But change isn't just about words. It's about actions." Tiana nodded slowly, her fingers closing around the pendant. "I want to help people change," she said after a long pause. "Like Miss Cole does. I don't want anyone else to feel like I did." Patricia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You're already helping, sweetheart. Just by being brave enough to tell your story." Word of Tiana's bravery had spread through their neighborhood, and soon the Bennetts began receiving visits from friends, neighbors, and even strangers who wanted to show their support. A group of local parents organized a small gathering at the community center, inviting Tiana and her family to share their story in a safe, supportive space. At first, Tiana was nervous about speaking in front of so many people, but as she looked out at the familiar faces in the room, faces that smiled at her with warmth and encouragement, she felt a spark of courage. Standing on the small stage,
she held the microphone tightly in her hands and took a deep breath.
I used to think that if you told the truth, people would believe you, she began, her voice trembling slightly. But sometimes, that's not enough. Sometimes, you have to fight for the truth. And even though it was scary, I'm glad I fought.
The room erupted into applause, and for the first time since the trial, Tiana felt a weight lift from her chest. She realized that her story wasn't just about what had happened to her, it was about what could change because of her. Later that evening, as the family sat together on the porch swing Jerome had fixed, Tiana rested her head on her father's shoulder.
The silver necklace glinted softly in the moonlight. Do you think it's really over now? She asked quietly. Jerome wrapped an arm around her, his voice steady and reassuring. It's over, baby. And no matter what comes next, we'll face it together.
Tiana closed her eyes, letting the gentle creak of the swing and the warmth of her family's love lull her into a rare moment of peace.
For the first time in weeks, she felt like a kid again, safe, loved, and ready to face the world.
The weeks turned into months, and the storm surrounding Tiana's trial slowly began to settle. Though the media eventually moved on to the next big story, the ripples of what had happened continued to spread through the community and beyond. For the Bennetts, life began to regain a sense of normalcy, though none of them would ever forget the lessons learned in that courtroom. Tiana returned to school, her days no longer clouded by fear but filled with cautious hope.
Her classmates, once distant and unsure, now looked at her with admiration.
Some of them approached her during lunch or after class, offering quiet words of support or asking her to share more about what happened.
Tiana didn't always have the answers, but she listened, and in those small conversations, she realized she wasn't just healing, she was helping others find their courage too.
One afternoon, Tiana arrived home from school to find a letter waiting for her on the kitchen table. The handwriting on the envelope was neat and familiar, and her heart lifted when she saw Miranda's name in the corner. She carefully opened it and unfolded the letter, reading the words slowly.
Dear Tiana, it began, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to let you know how proud I am of you, not just for the bravery you showed in court, but for the strength you've shown in the days since. Cases like yours remind me why I became a lawyer in the first place, and people like you remind me why the fight for justice is worth it. You may not realize it yet, but your story has the power to change lives. You've already inspired me, and I know you'll inspire so many others. Never forget that your voice matters, Tiana. Keep using it. The world needs more people like you. With admiration, Miranda Cole.
Tiana smiled as she folded the letter, her chest swelling with a quiet pride. She placed it carefully in her desk drawer, knowing she'd read it again on the days when doubt tried to creep back in. As time passed, Tiana's life began to blossom in ways she never expected. Inspired by her experience, she started a small group at her school called Voices for Change, where students could share their stories and work together to address issues of fairness and equality. The group grew quickly, attracting kids from all backgrounds who wanted to make a difference in their community. Tiana also found herself invited to speak at local events, where she told her story not with bitterness, but with hope and determination.
Her parents, always standing by her side, watched with pride as their daughter's voice became a beacon for others.
Officer McAllister didn't escape the consequences of his actions. The Internal Affairs investigation uncovered a troubling pattern of misconduct in his past, and he was ultimately dismissed from the police force. Public outcry over his behavior prompted local leaders to call for increased accountability within the department, leading to policy changes that aimed to prevent similar incidents in the future.
Though McAllister's dismissal didn't erase the pain he had caused, it served as a reminder that justice, while not always swift, could still be served.
One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Tiana and her family gathered on the porch. The swing creaked softly as Tiana sat between her parents, her head resting on her mother's shoulder while her father gently rocked the swing with his foot. The silver sunflower necklace hung around Tiana's neck, catching the last rays of sunlight. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we didn't fight back? Tiana asked quietly. Patricia wrapped an arm around her daughter, her voice steady and warm. Sometimes. But we did fight back, and that's what matters. You showed everyone that the truth is worth standing up for. Jerome nodded, his deep voice filled with pride. And you didn't just fight for yourself, Tiana.
You fought for everyone who's ever been told they don't matter. That's a powerful thing.
Tiana closed her eyes, letting their words settle over her like a blanket.
She wasn't just the girl who had been falsely accused anymore.
She was something more now, someone stronger, someone braver, someone who had turned pain into purpose. As the first stars began to appear in the night sky, Tiana felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she knew she wouldn't face it alone. With her family by her side and the lessons of her journey etched into her heart, she was ready for whatever came next. And in the quiet of that evening, with the warmth of her family surrounding her, Tiana realized something simple but profound: she wasn't just free from the weight of false accusations. She was free to dream, to grow, and to be whoever she wanted to be. The storm had passed, and now the horizon was hers. Thank you for watching this incredible story of courage and justice on Dark Stories. If Tiana's journey moved you, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to Dark Stories for more gripping tales that uncover the truth.
Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss an upload.
Stay tuned for more stories that inspire, only on Dark Stories.